Hello friends, we are going to discuss the topic that is transaction. Now what is the transaction means? Now first of all, the transaction is a unit of program execution that accesses and possibly updates various data items. This is the basic definition. Now in other words we can again say that the transaction is a collections of operations that form a single logical unit of work are called the transactions. Now to perform any task, any work, whatever the threads, whatever the small units of logical work that required to complete the transaction. So for collecting that work, we get a single transaction. Okay. Now consider the example. So the example in which we can say that the transferring funds from checking accounts to the saving accounts. This is the one transaction in which there are number of threads are going to do work to perform the single transaction. Now to fulfill the transaction, so whatever the transactions, whatever the work done by the transaction, to fulfill that transaction we require some properties. So what are the properties required for the transaction? So the properties, so to ensure the data integrity, the database system must maintain the ACID property. Now what is this ACID is? So the ACID nothing but the atomicity, consistency, isolation and durability. These are the four properties which are required to fulfill the transaction. So we are going to discuss one by one. So first is nothing but the atomicity. Now what atomicity says? So in atomicity, either all operations of transaction are reflected properly in the database or none. So whenever the atomicity property is there, so when the transaction starts, that started transaction should be completed successfully. Otherwise, that transaction should not be started at all. This is the main purpose of the atomicity. Second is nothing but the consistency. Now what the consistency says, the execution of a transaction in isolation, so it preserves the consistency of the database. That is the consistency. Next is nothing but the isolation. So what the isolation? So even though multiple transactions may execute concurrently, the system guarantees that for every pair of transactions T1 and T2, it appears to T1 that either T2 finishes execution before T1 started or T2 started execution after T1 finished. So thus, each transaction is unaware of other transaction executing concurrently in system. And the last one, that is durability. So in durability, what happens? So durability says that after a transaction completes successfully, the changes it has made to the database persist even if there are system failure. So that is the property durability states. So these are the four properties which are required. These are the properties that are the ACID property required to fulfill the transaction successfully. Thank you.